Good morning. Uh, so if you have some questions, you can also type in the chat box. Let us start from where we have stopped yesterday. So yesterday we discussed various types of hazards, and then we covered up to the water and climatological hazards. And then we were discussing the differences in terms of the names of these low pressure depressions that forms in the oceans or seas. The different names are hurricanes, cyclones, tornadoes, hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. So one common thing about these three types of natural events is that all are formed due to some sort of void in the air. Whenever there is a drop in the air pressure, then the nearby air comes to fill those voids. Then in the process, these events are created. But one commonality between all these three names is that these are formed in the ocean and they traverse or they come towards the land. And then we have another a similar kind of natural event that is known as the uh, tornado. The tornado, the difference is that its origin is inside the land itself. Normally, tornadoes are common in the northern part of the US. And then we have the cloudburst, that is another type of water and climatic hazard. So, what is a cloudburst? So, cloudburst is the phenomenon when you have a lot of rainfall that happens within a very short period of time in a very localized area. So due to that, uh, huge amount of water gets dropped in a certain area, and then in this process, there is instantaneous flooding. Cloudbursts are quite common in the Himalayan region, especially in the Uttarakhand or in the hilly areas of the Kumaon region. So there were instances where there have been cloudbursts in the recent past. Then um, villages, mostly the villages that are on the top of the hills, those get washed away, and then huge amounts of devastations takes place in just a matter of minutes. So this is a cloudburst. Cloudbursts are also responsible for dams bursting and then giving away the water. Because if there is a lot of water that pours on the upstream of a certain river that contains a dam, then the pressure inside the walls of the dams becomes tremendous, and then uh, some point of time, if the dams they gave away, then there is flooding in the downstream areas. So cloudburst is quite common in the Himalayan region, as I have said already. Then we have floods. So among the floods also, we have various kinds of floods.
Sir,
Just
why cloudburst occur? Can you repeat?
cloudbursts, it's a natural phenomenon again. Then you have a lot of rain that pours, and then that pours within a very short period of time, and then in the process, a huge amount of water gets released, and then this water, whenever it travels downstream, uh, the villages, all the whatever it comes on the way gets washed away. So why it forms, you have to actually go into the very deep of the atmospheric science for this region. And then sometimes there again huge amount of clouds which are also formed due to a lot of other atmospheric reasons. So it is quite common, as I have told you, in some of the parts of the Kumaon region, Rishikesh, in those areas. And The villages which are there, they experience this phenomenon of cloudburst from time to time. Uh, it's often mentioned that because of the localized convection or the currents which are responsible for the formation of these clouds are increasingly becoming frequent due to the climate change or the change in the atmospheric temperature, and then many other reasons associated with that. So, next thing is the floods. Floods, as I have already told or discussed in the earlier chapters, there are different, so various kinds of floods, starting with the most common that is known as the seasonal or the riverine flood. So floods normally it is considered as a natural event. And then this is a hazard as long as it doesn't cross the social sphere. So during the monsoon time, especially in these subtropical areas in the Southeast Asian countries or South Asian countries, we have the rain that starts mid of March and continues until April. And then this rain, whenever it pours on the particular basin or soil, a part of this goes into the soil, and then this is responsible for recharging uh, the water table. And then if you progress towards the end of this or the mid of this year, that means up to June and July, you will notice that this water table gets saturated. That means whenever more and more water falls on the same area, the water table gets increasing. The water table gets increased. That means the layer which holds the water beneath the soil starts to fill up. And then there comes a point when uh, there the voids inside the soil they cannot really hold any more water. So during this point of time, we see whatever amount of water that falls on these particular areas. These are translated as overland flow. So these ultimately goes and then meets the rivers and the streams. That means smaller streams, they ultimately contribute to the bigger streams, and then these bigger streams, they go to the bigger rivers. And then in the process, the banks of these rivers often happens, it spills over because the normal carrying capacity of the river exceeds. And then this point of time, we say that we have the riverine flood. This riverine flood is a seasonal event. It means it keeps on increasing or decreasing depending on the external factors and also on the season or the part of the season. So if we were in the monsoon season, this is quite a normal phenomenon. Apart from that, we also discussed regarding other types of floods. I don't think I should be mentioning it, just I will go to mention the names. Uh, the urban flood is another example where mostly it is due to the congestion in the drainage or because of the man-made activities. The drains which are meant for carrying this overland flow, they cannot really carry, and then these waters they overpour or over they spill over to the normal roads and then just hampers our day-to-day activities. This is one example of the urban flooding. It's also because we have mostly concretized many areas in the urban area, and then the water cannot really find a way to go below the normal soil layer in order to recharge the aquifers there. So this is how the normal urban flooding takes place. And it is also responsible, or it is also because of some of the problems in the planning and the mismanagement. So a lot of other activities also are responsible for urbanized flooding or urban flooding. Then we have the coastal flooding. Okay, so this thing we have discussed. Then Another types of flooding may be the flooding that is also associated with the cloudburst phenomenon. If it happens in a particular section of a river, then obviously the river will be spilled over. So, in your mind, what can be the other types of floods? Do you have some other examples that you can cite? Hello? No?
Sir,
Yeah. Yes. I cannot hear you. Can you give some other examples of floods? Have you seen floods in icy river, or do you think how this kind of floods may be different from the floods that we see normally in this part of our country? Yes. Mm, okay. So please, if you have some time, just go and then search. There's various different kinds of other floods. Okay, that actually are categorized into this kind of different types. So apart from that, we have the heat and the cold waves. That is quite self-explanatory. So heat wave is mostly felt nowadays in the northern part of India. Now the season is almost starting. We have extreme temperatures reaching up to almost 48 or 49 degrees centigrade, and then together with that, you have the wind that comes together, and then people um, feel the wave of the heat coming inside their houses. In order to stay safe from this heat wave, the people close their houses and then they secure the houses with uh, different kinds of cooling stuff, including air coolers and air conditioners. But these are quite normal nowadays, even is reaching in our northeastern part as well. Apart from that, we have the cold waves, which are also quite common in India, in the same region in the northern part. So if you see the Himalayan belt just below this range of mountains, they experience extreme climatological events, starting from uh, difference. The range of temperature that is experienced in this region is quite huge. Because during the cold wave or during the months of December and then during the months of November, this period of time, this northern part of India temperature drops almost up to the 0 degrees, and then during the summer, when temperature reaches up to 50 degrees centigrade, you see the range that is how big this range of temperature is. So, apart from our country, in some of these other countries, there is a constant phenomenon of heat and cold wave activities that takes place. For example, if you go to Mongolia, or if you go to this northern part, further away from the tropical region, suppose in Russia or in other parts of Europe towards the Scandinavian countries, you have extreme cold climates there. Mongolia, um, average temperature maybe all throughout the year is below mm, zero. So sometimes for them, the warmest day may be as warm as maybe 4 or 5 degrees centigrade. But on the other hand, you see in the Saharan desert, in the countries such as Mali, or in the countries such as Sudan, or in some of the tropical countries, there may be heat waves or the temperature that has an average value in and around 30 plus degrees centigrade. So this whole world actually has a wide and extreme variety of these climatological events. So sometimes these events, whenever they cross us against the social sphere or the day-to-day activities, it becomes kind of disaster. Okay, and then comes to drought. Drought. What is drought? Drought is normally the unavailability of water for your domestic purpose. So what are maybe the purposes? Why we need water? Water we need for agricultural activities mostly. So if in your agricultural land you do not have enough water in order to carry on your day-to-day activities, we term it as agricultural drought. So agricultural drought can be monitored by the level of stress that is shown in these plantations. If you are planting cotton, or if you are planting uh, wheat, or if you are planting paddy, so the level of agricultural stress drought can be seen in their normal growth. So if it is in the agricultural activities, this is mostly termed as agricultural drought. Again, drought has some different other categories. To mention is a climatological drought, or mm, yes, so climatological drought. So if drought prolongs for 1 year, and then again it continues for the next year in the same period of time, and then if you just find that it happens almost every year in a particular season or a particular time, and it continues for a prolonged period, that is known as climatological drought. So, drought also has a lot of adverse impacts on the behavior or on the daily activities or the daily lives of the common people. So, if you just throw a glance at the areas or uh, where often there is a scarcity of water or dearth of water, you see that people have developed different techniques for adaptation. For example, if you go to even not far away, if you go to some areas in Rajasthan or in some areas in Gujarat, then you will see that people have different adaptation techniques in order to survive in those areas. For example, whenever normally we use water in order to wash our utensils after we eat food, but in those areas, people normally, since they do not have the availability of water to do so, they take help of the sand, which is mostly available in those areas. And then similar things maybe you can see in the pattern of the food they eat, and then also the kind of transport in their clothes, in their cultural habits. Everywhere this is reflected. So this is again we will come later how you adapt to this sort of adverse conditions that is known as your adaptability. So in the entire disaster management cycle, we'll come to learn about these different terms. Adaptability, your capacity, vulnerability, again the risk. So these are some of the terms that you will often encounter whenever you study this subject. And again, drought can also happen in our uh, northeastern region, especially even in cities. So if you can you think of an example of drought that happens or occurs in Guwahati? Where have you seen drought in Guwahati, or have you experienced similar situation here, or probably in your area? Yes, as I told you before, I would like you all to participate. It is not like a radio that you just switch on and then you go and do some other things. Yes, unless you see, unless I don't really want to.
Yes.
Ah, so have you experienced drought, or can you give an example of a drought-like situation in an urbanized area, or why do you think drought can happen here in Guwahati?
Okay, sir, I have seen Guwahati in Paniketi, I think.
Yes, yes.
So in
First of all,
Paniketi,
can I see your name? Who are you? What's your name?
Temajat.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Uh, in the Paniketi, there is a, you know, uh, we can call as a harvesting. They are making harvest,
Uh huh.
but harvest, they are, they are cultivate, rice.
Yes.
Yes, just nearby where there is a constructions for the gas, maybe.
Ah, okay.
When there is a, rainy season, there used to be plot, but when there is a, nowadays, I think there is no water. So I have seen in the morning, there
Okay.
was a morning.
Okay.
So there was a no water for that, harvest for that
Mm-hmm.
rice and all. So they're taking water from the, motor,
Yes.
giving that
Yes.
water to the rice and all for 1 2 weeks. No, I have
Yes.
seen that
Good.
every morning. I when I
Good.
taking a walk. All.
Good.
So that
Good.
was I can call as usual.
Yes. So
Yeah.
yes, Temajad, I think your observation is quite precise, I would like to say, because people may think that drought happens only in areas where in the desert is there, but this is not true. Drought may happen for various activities. Sometimes, or mostly, it happens if there is no rainfall for a prolonged period of time, or in particularly urban areas such as in Guwahati, if you just go to this town, you will see we have a lot of big buildings, and we have many industrial habitats or industrial activities that keep on happening in those areas. But if you see that in these buildings or in these condominiums or flats, there is not a regular supply of domestic water from a river. So, for this reason, each of these flats or these condominiums, people depend on the groundwater. That means the water that is below the ground trapped in some of these aquifers. So if you keep on exploiting this water, that means if you keep extracting this water farther and farther and farther, then there will be not much water available for use for domestic purpose. So it is now a common practice in Guwahati, or it is a common scene now. It is seen all over Guwahati that people have to buy water from different sources. So this is because of the overexploitation of water. Then this leads to the unavailability of water, which you can say as drought. It may be throughout the whole year in some of these areas, or it may be just 1 or 2 months out of this 12 months period. So this is quite an issue because the groundwater depletion or this drought-like condition is happening because of our over dependence on the groundwater. And it is really a pity, I would say, uh, because we have this huge river of Brahmaputra. It is huge in the sense it comes within maybe the five big rivers if you compare, or seven big rivers from the top in the world itself. But even then, we die for water during the summertime in these flats. So this river is flowing quite near to us. Even after that, we do not have water uh, for the domestic purpose. In many of these condominiums or the houses, especially in the greater Guwahati or in Guwahati area, this is a condition that man or anthropogenically people have created due to our dependence on the groundwater. So sometimes, if I tell you that if we keep on extracting the water farther and farther, there is an activity that is known as groundwater depletion and then land subsidence that may take place. So, because if you keep on extracting water farther, the soil in the voids which hold water, it may compress, and in the process, the there may be settlements which may take place over where you get these big buildings. So it is becoming quite an important issue, especially in major cities also, like um, Indonesia, Jakarta, and then in Bangkok. So even now we are seeing some of this land subsidence happening in some of the Indian cities. So it is not a good thing that you entirely depend on the groundwater for your domestic water uses. So if you see the planning of major cities all across the developed countries, such as cities like in the US or in Japan, there are huge mega cities or cosmopolitan areas like Tokyo or in San Francisco. People build these big buildings, but their dependence of the water is not entirely the groundwater. So we have failed in the sense to secure water from the big river or the alternate sources. So this is where intervention of a town planner or a civil engineer is quite important for to overcome these problems. So see, this is again becoming a disaster. So it is affecting our day-to-day life. You do not have water for domestic purposes. You cannot have water to drink. You do not have water for your daily washing. So ultimately, it affects your lives in an adverse way. That itself is a disaster. And then again, uh, because of a change in the climate, particularly in the northeast region, people have started to experience drought. How? Uh, According to climate model, most likely scenario is the A1B scenario. It says that for the Northeast Indian region, in the coming years, there will be an increase in the uh, frequency of extreme precipitation. That means uh, extreme precipitation will increase. So what I mean to say that, uh, but on the other hand, the average or the total amount, the volume of rainfall will decrease. That means, suppose in the last year, if you compare the average amount of rainfall, and then if you compare it, pardon me, not last year, maybe last 20 years ago, and then if you compare it uh, this uh, current year, you will find that the total amount of rainfall has decreased in especially the Northeast Indian region due to the issues related with climate change. But on the other hand, there is an increase in sudden and extreme precipitation events in the northeastern region. That is why two things we have seen quite frequently nowadays. The first thing is that because of the reduction in the total amount or the average amount of rainfall, in many of these areas where we used to grow paddy, these lands now are witnessing a drought-like situation. So the farmers they keep on waiting for the rain to come, but the do not rain rain do not come, and then ultimately you see the stress of this water in the paddy that is grown there. So this is because of the drought, and then you see it on the land. You do not have to go too far. This has already started happening in parts in Lakhimpur, in Assam, also in the northern part of the Brahmaputra Valley. And then on the other hand, as because there is a sudden release or there is an increase in the extreme precipitation events, that means uh, the rainfall that releases huge amount of water, their frequency is increasing. So we see increase in the flash flood. So, okay, flash flood is another kind of floods I should have mentioned during the water and climatological hazards. So, what is a flash flood? So, if you are there living in the mountains or the hills. For a typical example, I would like to give of a flash flood is there is a river in northern belt of Assam, which is known as Ziadhol. Ziadhol River is there in Dhemaji. Okay, and then the upstream of the river is in the hills of Arunachal Pradesh. So there may be few of the students who are from Arunachal Pradesh. I don't know. Tem Azad, maybe you're from Arunachal. So it is in the West Siang district, and then this river on the upstream is due to the formation of three rivers which are known as Siri, Sika, and Sido. So whenever there is a rainfall in the hills of Arunachal Pradesh, then suddenly uh, uh, the water from the hills they gush together, and then these waters come downstream, and then within 6 hours of rainfall, you will see normally in the Jiadhan River there is huge amount of water that comes. So this is an example of a typical flash flood. That means if uh, from the point of rain up to the point of the first wave that is recorded in a particular section of the river, you have less than 6 hours. It can be termed as flash flood. That means normally there is no water in the river, but suddenly you see a huge amount of water that just gushes into the river. So this is an example of flash flood. So due to this change in the climate, what I was saying, in the Northeast Indian region, we see normally nowadays drought in parts of the northern valley, as well as there is an increase in this flash floods. Why? Because the extreme rainfall events are increasing. That means uh, suddenly there is a huge amount of rainfall that is being poured into part of the upstream basin or the river. Then these rains, when they translate into the downstream areas, we see a lot of flash flood activities. Okay, check the time. Okay, so we have another 13 minutes. Uh, so again, drought. Then we have snow avalanches. Snow avalanches is got quite common in our part, but maybe in some of the upper part of Arunachal Pradesh, or maybe in some parts of Himachal, or in probably in Kashmir, those areas you will see snow avalanches. It is a mass of snow that just rolls down, and something quite common like your landslide, and then it is triggered by a certain activity because the slope fails for some region, then the slow or the ice just just travels at huge speed uh, towards the downstream, or towards the valley, or towards the bottom of the mountain. So here, one photograph here, you can see the snow avalanche that is here on the right side here, and then this is quite threatening to the villages which may be situated below. I think I, I, I scheduled this meeting for 45 minutes, but for some reason I'm not getting enough time. So even in the case this meeting is over within 5 minutes, I will ask you to join using the same link, okay, so that we can continue another 10 minutes time. Okay. So apart from that, we have the hailstorm. So hailstorm, what is a hailstorm? So when the temperature on the upper part of the atmosphere is below 0 degree. Then, whenever in the formation of the raindrops, uh, you see these ice balls instead falling down. So it creates a lot of devastation, particularly to the livestock and the agricultural land. whenever there is a hailstorm. Hailstorms are also seen in northeastern part of India. Okay, then after that you see a lot of birds getting killed, or even your paddy being destroyed, whatever cultivation you did in the land gets damaged. Or there may be instances where if you are out in the open and then this kind of hail actually falls over you, you may have the chance of getting injured. Okay, and then people's houses also get
How, sir,
spoiled. Yeah,
temperature get 0 degrees Celsius above the atmosphere? How and why, sir?
I think that is a question I cannot rightly answer you, but for that you have to study atmospheric science. And this is beyond the scope of explanation of this particular subject. But I can give you links from where you have to study yourself, and then probably you will be able to know it. It is a very complex phenomenon why these temperatures, how it is changing all over the globe. So in for that particular question, even if you ask me now, I probably is not the right person to answer it. But yes, this is a good question, I admit, and then I will share you the link. Okay, I am not a climatological expert on that.
Okay, sir.
Uh, uh. Then there are other environmental hazards, including the pollutions which take place in various aspects of the environment. It may be in the water, it may be on the land, or it may be in the air, wherever. So you see, my part of the job is to intrigue the questions in your mind, but I do not have the answers, all answers for me. So as a part of the teacher, this is my objective. So if you are having a question, this is a good thing, but the question's answer may not be with me all the time. So I'm mostly concerned with the managing part of this disaster. But if you really go to the science or the origin of the disasters, it itself is a huge chapter in itself. As you see, the climatological part or atmospheric science, uh, probably a good person having a degree on that should be able to answer you that query. For example, why the molten magma is formed below the earth, or why the ocean currents they just change their directions over the period of the year, or why, as you can see, the earth atmosphere on the top gets below 0 degree. These are purely atmospheric science questions. So probably if I get across some of these links, I'll share, and then hopefully you get your answers.
About thunder, sir. Why thunder is not in the list?
No, as I said, it is not a complete list. So if you have
Oh,
some of
okay.
these uh, uh, hazards that you point out, it is not there in the list. It is not a conclusive list, but this is some of the examples that is being shown here. So there may be thousands other hazards which are not being incorporated in this list. But particularly the kind of hazards that are being shown here falls into the kind of types or categories that is being shown on the left side. So you have the environmental pollutions. Mostly nowadays it is